very good morning to everyone. Today, we are proud to have with us a young, dynamic, supremely talented, a very inspirational personality, IPS officer, Ms. Brinda Shukla, ma'am. Currently, ma'am is serving as a Deputy Commissioner of Police, Women and Safety, Noida. Before that, ma'am was serving as a Superintendent of Police in Nagaland. We would like to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of Sharda University School of Law in this webinar on role of police in administration of justice. Our students are eagerly waiting to hear from you, ma'am. So without taking much time, I would like to call our respected Dean, sir, Professor Dr. Pradeep Kulse, sir, to give welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Ritu. It is my distinct privilege to extend a very warm welcome to Ms. Binda Shukla, IPS, DCP Women Security, Gautam Budh Nagar, and the participants in this webinar on the role of police in the administration of justice. Chief guest on the occasion, Ms. Binda Shukla has studied economics, international studies, French literature, and currently, despite a very hectic schedule, she is taking out time to pursue her master's from MIT US. Thank you, ma'am, for sparing your precious time during this, so demanding, agitation and so many issues going on. Uh, Dear participants, police plays an important role in the administration of justice delivery system. And police, apart from maintaining law and order, crime prevention, crime control, and community policing, plays important role in ensuring fair investigation. Because without investigation, conviction will never take place. Okay, and in many developed countries, there are separate police wings for maintaining law and order and for conducting investigations. But in India, so far, we don't have separate investigation wing. So police is multitasking. They are doing, law and order, VIP security, then community policing, then and also they are expected to do investigations. So sometimes investigation quality of investigation is not up to the mark. And Justice V.S. Malimat committee report in 2003 recommended that there should be a separate investigation wing, which is well trained, which is only focused on investigation part, so that conviction rate can improve and the faith of the common person can, improve in the investigation. But so far, still, I think it is in uh, pending somewhere. Uh, I want to tell one more thing because ma'am will be saying role of the police and her own experiences in policing. Uh, uh, with ma'am's active patronage, some of you must be knowing, some of you may not be aware of first year student especially. Gautam Budh Nagar Police with Sharda University has established one family dispute redressal clinic in Knowledge Park Police Station. And this, clinic was set up last year. Last year December, we were thinking that we inaugurate, but it kept delaying for one or other reasons. Initially, it was thought that DGP UP Police will come and inaugurate. Then, system in Noida was changed to commissariat system. Then MAM came, and with MAM, things got expedited. So we had formal inauguration, and now our team, police team, MAM and her team, then Dr. Ritu Gautam, Dr. Urmila, Dr. Ruchi, and Dr. Bhavna, and many other our research scholars. They are going on Friday and Saturdays, and many family disputes, especially during this COVID pandemic. People are in home, people have lost job, some people have lost their livelihood. A lot of stress is there. So people domestic violence cases have gone up. So NCW conducted a research where they found out that this domestic violence cases have gone up all across India. So in Noida also many cases are reported to police of domestic violence. So these cases first ma'am and her team they are talking to them, and some cases where they feel that this they can be resolved out of court. These cases are referred to this family dispute resolution clinic. So far, with very hard work of all the stakeholders, this team has been successful in resolving more than 50 cases. More than 50 families have been helped through mediation techniques. So this is wonderful initiative, and this can be a template which can be replicated all over India. This will help courts because courts are already battling with pendency of cases. More than 2.5 crore cases are pending all across India at district courts. So courts can save their time to devote on serious matters. Then police also can be help. They can also focus their time on crime prevention and crime investigation instead of getting involved into the family things. So this initiative, ma'am, is doing wonderful, and I'm sure in future also we'll continue to work. And now with the passage of time, the team is getting trained also, so they are becoming trained, mediators. So I'm sure in future this will the success rate will go up and people are very happy. Sometimes I go there, people come with sweet boxes and they say that we are so thankful for administration that they helped them resolve these issues. So, not taking much time, ma'am, with these words, I, on my own behalf and on the behalf of the management, faculty, non-teaching staff, students, and participants, welcome you once again in this webinar on the role of police in the administrative justice. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kulshesh, for such a warm welcome. And thank you again to Dr. Ritu Gautam, who always manages to pull me for one webinar or another, even though I'm quite convinced that everybody at the School of Law must be fed up of hearing my voice by now.
Not at all.
So
No,
anyway. But I just want to share a small anecdote with all our participants before I get onto the topic, and that is that the last 2-3 days had been quite hectic. So I had not really found time to look at the poster and to see the exact topic. And this morning I woke up and I got my cup of tea and I thought, okay, now I'll sit and think about it. And I looked at the topic and, for a minute or so, I was completely flummoxed. And I called Dr. Ritu saying that I just saw this topic and, I don't see how I'm going to be able to speak about it. But thankfully for me, she said that, she says, no, now it's too late to change it on the posters, ma'am. We'll go ahead with this topic. And then when I actually, forced myself to sit down and think about it, I realized what a loaded topic it is and how much food for thought it gives. And it has so many nuances to it, particularly in India, as I started thinking about it versus other countries, given the state of the criminal justice system at large. And it threw up for me some very interesting ideas then, which I'm going to talk about, and hopefully it's going to spark an interesting discussion. I'm going to keep my own piece brief and just, kind of bring out the things that I think are most pertinent when we think about the role of police in the administration of justice. I think it's one of those topics which is actually great food for thought for students of first year law. And perhaps we can engage in a good discussion afterwards once I'm done talking, and then we can agree or disagree and see where we go with this topic. So when we think about the role of the police in the administration of justice, I think the starting point, which is extremely crucial, is to think about what exactly do we mean by justice. And perhaps, first year students of law are exposed to theories of justice and how they've evolved since the beginning of organized society or even prior to that. But I think that the nature of the criminal justice systems all across the world throws up primarily 3 or 4 contemporary theories of justice, which are extremely relevant, and those are the ones that I'm going to touch upon today. And those 4, if I just were to quickly list them out, I think those would be retributive justice, the utilitarian theory of justice, restorative justice, and reformative justice. So I think that mostly all modern criminal justice systems are based on these 4 theories of justice. All our systems of crime and punishment are based on these 4 theories of justice. So the most important, again, personally, the one that I find most important when I think about the criminal justice system, and I think I've started feeling this even more strongly after being part of the police force, and that I would say is the retributive justice. And I just want to again share a very common example. If we think about the most publicized rape trial in recent times, I would say it's the Nirbhaya rape trial. And if you were, and I think the media spent a considerable amount of time and gave a considerable amount of media space to the anguish of the family. And, their prolonged anguish over 7 years until the convicts were were hanged. And I think if we think about it, if we think about this prolonged anguish, despite all the support that they were getting from the state or from the country, it was because it's a natural human instinct to want an aggressor to suffer the way a victim has suffered. I think it's very easy to theorize and say that systems of punishment or criminal justice systems should be reform based. But I think human instinct gets the better of us, and it's a very natural human instinct in all of us to want that somebody who has been an aggressor, somebody who has wronged somebody, should suffer the same way as the person who has been wronged. And I think that the basics of our criminal justice system are based on this system. So for those who may not be familiar, the retributive theory of justice is basically a theory of justice, or it's a theory of punishment, which says that when an offender breaks the law, justice requires that they suffer in return, and that the response to a crime is proportional to the offense which has been committed. That's just the simplest definition that you'd be able to get off of Wikipedia. So normally now, I think why this topic is extremely important and interesting in the Indian context is because, as is often said, and as I think most people who have any exposure to the law will agree, our criminal justice system is in shambles. It's in shambles. There is such huge pendency, such staggering pendency, that justice is greatly delayed, if not denied. And the criminal justice system is laborious, it's hard to access, it's expensive, and it's simply crumbling. So when we think about retributive justice, if we were to think about the way philosophers or political scientists who came up with the theory, when they mean retribution, they mean the final punishment which is given for an offense. They think retribution is done when, let's say, an eye is taken for an eye, or let's say in the case of Nirbhaya, the way she was brutalized, which eventually led to her death. So the convicts were hung until death. Similarly, pure retributive punishment. But now, in a system where justice is so delayed, Nirbhaya was one of those cases which actually got a great deal of priority. And despite that, it took 7 years for all the appellate processes to be over and for final punishment to be given out and administered. Typically, it takes much longer than that. So how exactly, do we dispense retributive justice? And I think that's where the role of the police becomes acutely important, because the police is the first cog in the machine of the criminal justice system. It's the first interface that the victim has with the criminal justice machinery. And that's what makes it extremely important, and it gives a great deal of potential to the police in terms of the instant balming effect that the police can have on the victim who is coming to the police in their moment of great distress. And how exactly can we have this balming effect, or how exactly can we dispense that instant retributive justice? And I think there are several ways of doing it. And we will start from a fairly routine offense to a more serious one. Like, for instance, if we think about domestic violence, a wife getting beaten up or brutalized or roughed up by her husband, she will call the police, because marriage is one of those relationships where if a wife is beaten up or if she's brutalized, it's such a great insult to her self-esteem, because she's giving her everything. She's raising your children, she's cooking your food, she's managing your household. Often she's contributing to the family income. And after that, in such an intimate relationship, she's brutalized. And when she comes to the police, what she's looking for is an instant restoration of her self-esteem. And how do we do that? Even if we do something as simple as simply putting the husband in the lockup for the course of the night. In the morning, she comes back, gets him released, and goes back happy, thinking that justice has been done, that he wronged me and he had to suffer by spending a night in a dirty, dark, dingy lockup. It's retributive justice right there, without having registered a case, without having pushed her into the encumbrances of the criminal justice system. If we take it up a notch further, let's say that doesn't work. Let's say that the brutalization is a little bit more extreme than that. Let's say she has been roughed up really bad. She needs medical attention. Perhaps she has a fracture or two. Let's say she still doesn't want to get pushed into the encumbrance of the criminal justice machinery. Often women don't have the wherewithal to fight, or to defend themselves in such a laborious process. A lot of you may be familiar with Section 151 of the CRPC, which basically authorizes a magistrate to detain somebody for up to 15 days, imprison them for up to 15 days, and release them on a good behavior bond, which often involves a pretty steep surety which has to be paid. And you have to assure the magistrate that you're going to behave yourself for 6 months or 1 year and you're not going to repeat it. And you can also imprison them for up to 15 days. We often take recourse to that. Again, retributive justice right there. Somebody who has been wronged, and if somebody, known to her, especially in an intimate relationship, or somebody, in the extended family, in the neighborhood, who has wronged a victim, if they are put away for 5 to 6 days, that gives the person the sense that they wronged me, they have gotten what they deserved. So you see what I'm getting at. What I'm trying to say here is that the police can dispense justice very quickly if it simply uses the tools that it has at its disposal wisely and in the interest of those that are coming to it. But what usually happens, why we are not able to dispense this justice, is because there is a general sense of apathy. And most often we see it with cases of domestic violence. There's a general sense that this is a family matter, we're not going to get into it. Or the police often, when I'll say, okay, detain the husband for the night and perhaps we'll leave him in the morning if things are better. And police persons will say, ma'am, this is what they do every other day. Why should we get into this? But what they are not understanding is that in that moment, the victim needs retributive justice. She needs somebody to fight for her self-esteem. She needs somebody to say that she has been wrong and that the person who has done it, the aggressor, has to be put in place. I think that for me is the simplest definition of justice. And there are so many ways that it can be given out without burdening the criminal justice machinery and without burdening the victim of defending themselves in such a cumbersome system. Then similarly with arrest, let's say there has been a rape or there has been a murder. And let's say the police were not to arrest the person who has committed this heinous crime. Then what is the rest of the criminal justice machinery going to do? We say that giving justice is in the hands of the judiciary. But if the first cog in the machine were not to do its duty, could justice be given out? It's not possible. So again, I think it really brings to light what a crucial role the police plays and how important it is to make timely arrests and then to fight for not granting bail in heinous cases. Again, these are things which bring instant peace to the victim. In the gravest of crimes I've seen, since I deal with crimes against women, I'm constantly exposed to things like rape. And almost on a daily basis, we have rape reported. And a lot of them are such vicious, heinous crimes. And the victims are in such a terrible state. Just yesterday, we had a 13-year-old girl who had to be operated upon. She was so badly brutalized. But the second the victim knows that the aggressor has been arrested, there's peace. There's instant peace in them. And what I often try to do is we send a picture. We don't like to put the victim and the accused face to face. But in cases where the accused is unknown, just to confirm that this is the right person, we make the victim just see a picture of him in the lockup. And many times I have been there, the victim has been in my office, and I can just see the change in expression as soon as they see that the accused is behind bars. And I think that right there is a small moment of justice prevailing for the victim. Just knowing that the accused has been put away, that they did not deserve to walk free, they have been put away. Their punishment will come many, many years later, perhaps many decades later. In so many cases, by that time, the victim would have stopped bothering even about going to the court. But just that sense that they were arrested back then and that they rotted away in a prison for a few months, it's justice prevailing right there. And the police is instrumental in making it happen. In fact, in the absence of the police not performing this duty, it would not be possible for the subsequent process of the criminal justice machinery to even take off. So this is what I have to say about the retributive theory of justice and the retributive theories on which crime work and police interventions and punishment is based, and I've spoken a little bit about what an important role the police plays here. Then second, I'm going to move on to the utilitarian theory of punishment. So while the retributive theory said that somebody who has done something wrong deserves to be punished and the punishment should be proportionate to the nature of the crime, the utilitarian theory, on the other hand, is a little bit more philosophical. It's a little bit more broad-minded. It's a little bit more futuristic. And the utilitarian theory says that no, people who have done wrong deserve to be punished to deter the recurrence of such crimes in the future in that particular society. That punishment today is important to take the society towards being a more civilized and a more safe society. So it sees the role of police intervention, it sees the role of punishment as more futuristic in terms of the society evolving in general. Now, the Indian system is most often criticized. The criminal justice system is most often criticized for failing the utilitarian theory of justice. And why is that? Because the system is so delayed. The process of dispensing justice is so delayed. And many of you may have read articles in the papers or participated in debate competitions, because I think that capital punishment or the death penalty is one such classic subject which is often discussed. It's often written about whenever there is an important execution. There are a number of articles in the papers questioning the efficacy of the death penalty or questioning the efficacy of capital punishment. Every year we have growing numbers of countries which are abolishing the death penalty. And why is that? This entire argument against the death penalty is based on the utilitarian theory of justice, because there's a whole body of research all around the world which indicates that the certainty of punishment is more effective than the severity of the punishment in deterring future crime. That people have the fear of the law or people have the fear of the police only when they know that they are going to be swiftly and most certainly punished. They are not afraid if the punishment is severe, but it's not sure whether it will happen or not. And the Indian system is criticized precisely for not ensuring swiftness in dispensing justice, nor certainty. Our laws are extremely severe. We still give out the death penalty, and for a good number of cases, but that's clearly not helping deter crime. So again, here I have a slightly differing opinion, and I just want to give you some food for thought in terms of what role the police can play as far as the utilitarian theory of justice is concerned. Now, for instance, just to give you a small example, ever since Gautam Budh Nagar was converted to a police commissionerate, we now have, as many of you may know, we have a separate vertical now for crimes against women and children. We have a lot more force that's available with us. We have a lot more resources that are available with us. And we are also monitoring every case very closely. And so the one great outcome that has come out of it is that at every police station, and Dr. Kulshresh talked about this to some extent, and he raised a very, very valid point. One of the great reasons why crime work and investigation and quality of investigation, and then the police being part of the process of dispensing justice until conviction, why that has been suffering in India is because we have not been able to enforce the basic police reform recommended by committee after committee, that law and order and crime work need to be separated. Right now, what we are doing is, just to give you a slightly exaggerated but a very accurate example. Let's say that a very serious rape has taken place today, and that case gets endorsed to a sub-inspector to investigate. Now, there are n number of things he needs to do. And the victim who has been wronged, is waiting that, okay, today this is going to happen. Tomorrow they are going to take me to the magistrate to record my statement. And the day after, perhaps, I'll get a thorough medical examination. And the following day, perhaps I'll get a counseling session. All these things are expected by somebody who has been wronged in such a big way. And the state and the police are there to defend them. But tomorrow, let's say, again, the farmer agitation sparks. And this same sub-inspector is now doing duty there for 10 days. The victim and her family will keep calling, saying, "Hamare case mein kya hua? Hamare case mein kya hua? Kya hua? Kya hua?" And he'll just say, "Arey, meri to yahan duty lagi hai, phone rakh diya." Classic problem of the system, which is making it apathetic, it's making it unresponsive, and it's leading to a complete dilution of accountability. An accused who has committed a crime today and has run away somewhere, the first 2 days are that golden period within which he or she can be arrested. Beyond that, it's a lost cause. It's a case of pure luck whether you'd be able to catch them or not. Like, it's exactly like going to a doctor. When you have an open wound, you need to get that wound examined right away, because there is a golden period within which the body's natural healing mechanisms have to kick in. After that, the wound is going to rot. It may heal on its own, or it may turn into a gangrene and you have to chop your limb off. It's exactly like this. There are certain things in the police, because we are dealing with such sensitive things, we are dealing with such sensitive human emotions and such grave manifestations of human perversions, that there are actions which need to be taken right away. And that cannot happen if you're going to have one police person doing n donkey number of tasks and running around in different directions. Which is why specialization is the greatest need of the hour if we are to think about any sort of police reform and reform of the criminal justice system in this country. And while it has not happened on a pan-India level, or it has not happened as a national policy, it is being tried as an experiment in a number of places, Gautam Budh Nagar being one of them. And the way we've done it is, we've now earmarked 2 sub-inspectors in every police station who are managing the Women and Child Safety Center in that police station, and they are dedicated for the investigation of only crimes against women and children. They are not used for any other duty, and they are not used for investigating any other kind of crime. So what have we done in the process? We have fixed their responsibility, and we have fixed accountability, because now they have no excuse for not performing, because they are not being burdened by anything else. And that fixing of responsibility and accountability has given us drastic results. Ever since the inauguration of the commissionerate, there is not a single case of a rape against a child or genuine rape. I mean, all rape cases are genuine. I'm taking the liberty here of saying something slightly controversial. So we have a growing trend now of relationships going sour being registered forcibly as cases of rape. So barring those cases, keep those aside, because we have a different protocol for those. But every genuine case of rape and rape against a child, we have arrested the accused within 2 days. There is not a single accused person who is missing, who is not in jail. On average, we are filing a charge sheet in every 15 days. So investigation is completed within 15 days and the charge sheet gets filed, so that the ball is now in the court, in the court's court, and the criminal justice system can begin. We are regularly liaising with forensic science labs and with the courts to bring the most heinous cases on fast-track trials. So you see what an important role now the police can play from the perspective of the utilitarian theory of justice. And now, I think 1 year's worth of data, I often keep talking to Dr. Kulshesh and Dr. Gautam about how, all our work should be based on statistics. And often I keep talking to them about how we can partner, even the experiment that we are running with this counseling center, which I will speak about subsequently. But I always feel that, all our new initiatives should be backed by data. It should be backed by how our numbers are changing, because that's really going to tell us whether we are doing something right, whether we should further scale it, whether it needs to be modified, or whether it's the same thing as previously and it hasn't made any difference. So what I want to say is that 1 year's data is too little for me to say whether this experiment has worked or not. But just to give a quick thing, because yesterday I was sharing it with the press, so I have some numbers at my ready disposal. Last year's cases of rape were 89, and this year they are 37. So there may be a number of other explanatory factors, one major one being the nationwide lockdown for about 3 months. But the difference is drastic. So I would like to believe that this specialization that we are now affecting has started sending out the message that crimes like these will not be taken lightly, that you cannot just commit a crime and get away with it, that the police does catch you for sure. So while punishment may be delayed, but that immediate arresting and failure to get bail, that is also going to have a deterrent effect on the commission of crime. And that's where I think that the swiftness of police action in responding to the commission of a crime can push the cause of the utilitarian theory of justice as well, not just the retributive. Is that making sense? I hope I'm not, going too fast with very complex ideas.
No, ma'am,
So,
it's really interesting.
okay. Thank you. So, that said, I also want to give the disclaimer that the police can have a limited effect on the utilitarian theory of justice. Because what we see increasingly, and again, I can share this with you from personal example. One of the worst cases of dowry death that I saw during my tenure here was recently in Dadri, where the girl, it was a Muslim family, and this girl, her mother had died when she was a child. She didn't have any brothers. Her father was paralyzed. So she was from a very, very economically weak sort of background, and she and her real sister were married into this family, and she was beaten up all the time. Her sister later told us in her statement that they would beat her so mercilessly, and because I'm also married and I don't really have much backing me, so I won't be able to say much, but once in a while when it got really bad, I would say that why are you beating my sister so badly? And she says whenever I would do that, then my husband would turn on me, otherwise she would not get beaten up, the older sister. But whenever she tried to defend her younger sister, her husband would turn on her saying that she's his wife, my brother's wife, you have no business interfering. The girl was 7.5 months pregnant when the dowry that happened, and it was pure murder. She was sleeping, and at about 5 o'clock in the morning, her husband seems to have put a country-made weapon right beneath her breast, and he shot her. And the impact of the gunshot caused her to abort. They hid the fetus also somewhere, and they all absconded. One of the worst cases ever. And I visited the scene of crime, and I saw this girl, and for many days I remained so deeply thoughtful of this case, and I kept wondering that what is it that makes people behave like this. And I went to interrogate her husband on my own. He was in the lockup, and I just thought, just from a purely intellectual point of view, I just wanted to understand, what is the psychology of a person like this. So I went to speak to him, and I got a cup of tea for him and for me, because I didn't want to sort of have him beaten up or interrogated. I really just wanted to understand his psychology. So I said, I've just come to have chai with you, and tell me why you did this. And what I discovered was that he had been a petty criminal. He had been in and out of the jail for cases of theft. And he was very familiar with what the system is. He was very familiar with how long the police can detain them in the lockup, very familiar with how much time usually they have to spend in jail before they are eligible for bail. Given their economic status, how much bail amount typically has to be furnished. He was so familiar with all of it. And he simply said, what, she had started annoying me. And I knew कि बस कुछ महीने जेल ही जाना पड़ेगा, उसके बाद तो छूट ही जाएंगे. And so I shot her. So you see there, complete failure of the criminal justice system in crime deterrence. Just knowing that it's just a question of a few months in jail, and then God knows when the trial will begin. By then, this sort of strata is their status is so transient in one place. It's such a large country. They will go and disappear anywhere. You won't even have an address where to send their notices to call them for their witnesses. You won't be able to even bring them to trial. There is no way that we can prohibit the granting of bail beyond a few months. So there are some problems which can only be fixed by fixing the inherent structural defects of the criminal justice system as far as the utilitarian theory of justice is concerned. Yes, the swiftness of police action may impact a few people and may cause the fear in them that they should not commit crime. But in the more hardened population, especially petty criminals who have already had an interface, have already had a brush with the police and with the other components of the criminal justice system, for them, the great pendency and the laggardness of the courts causes a complete failure of the utilitarian theory of justice. So the police can do a bit, but not everything. Okay, then I'm going to come to the last theory that I wanted to talk about today, and that's restorative justice. Restorative justice is something that we haven't given much to, we haven't given much thought to in India. We haven't invested much in it at all. And that's just because we are a resource-starved country, and we have so many other problems that we just don't have the time, the energy, the wherewithal to invest in these things. But Western systems of punishment draw on the restorative theory of justice a great deal. And I just want to give a brief definition of what it is. So restorative justice is an approach to justice in which one of the responses to a crime is to organize a meeting between the victim and the offender, sometimes with representatives of the wider community, in the hope of reforming people, in the hope of reforming society, and in the hope of a better outcome for all stakeholders. Now, what we are doing with the counseling center at Sharda University is a quintessential example of restorative justice. People who are coming to us, and Dr. Ritu, she's one of the chairs of the counseling panels. Crime has occurred there because to brutalize a woman or a man, aggressors can be both men and women, to physically abuse, to mentally abuse, to emotionally abuse, to financially abuse, these are all crimes under the IPC. So a crime has happened. But the approach that we are taking, that the police and the criminal justice system are taking, is not to simply lock the offender away. It's to create a platform where the victim, the offender, and other stakeholders of the community come together and discuss why the crime happened and what can be done to prevent it and to improve outcomes for everybody. And the reason why we have not been able to scale it in India is because it takes intelligentsia, it takes resources, it takes time, energy that very few police forces have thought of investing in. This is one of the sort of counseling center that we've set up here is one among just a handful in the entire country. There are very, very few state police forces or very few district police forces who are experimenting now with this kind of methodology for punishment and reform, where you're bringing families together, you're putting the accused and the victim face to face, and you're finding an alternate way of mediation, of dispensation of justice, and of creating better outcomes for everybody. And this is not just, for cases of marital discord. Now, increasingly, I have also started doing it for cases of relationship discord, which would ultimately result in 376 IPC cases being registered. Gautam Budh Nagar has a very toxic and aggressive culture of relationships going sour and a case of rape being registered by the girl. When I took over, we were registering almost one case every other day. But I have also taken a very aggressive stance in this, and we don't refer these cases so much to Sharda because I'm a bit scared of it spiraling out of control, but I have a women's cell in my office where we are actually providing counseling to a number of such couples. We are bringing their families on board. And we are trying to tell them that, filing a bogus case, because the people who are going to jail in cases like these are people like you and me. They are young people, they are IT executives, they are college students who were in relationships, which is not a crime. And things don't always work out. But then to misuse the law in registering cases, that's going to have a lose-lose outcome for everybody. And so we are trying to create a platform for restorative justice here versus retributive justice, which was being done by registration of a case, throwing the person in jail, and then probably extorting a hefty amount of money to change your statement and let them come out on bail or to withdraw your case. So I think that these are really the ideas of justice that I wanted to put forward to you, and how I see the police playing a role in affecting them, and how the criminal justice machinery needs to go further in being able to do greater justice to these ideas of justice. And finally, just to close off, it's something that Dr. Kulshresht started his welcome address with, and that's simply that finally, when we are talking about justice, justice prevails when conviction happens. A crime happened and the case was investigated. It was thoroughly investigated. A quality charge sheet was submitted to the court. Everybody who was a stakeholder in the case, everybody who was a witness in the case showed up during the trial. They gave their testimony and the case resulted in conviction. That's the end of the criminal justice process. And for that to happen, investigation and prosecution are two pillars which need a lot of investment from the side of the police and from the side of the judiciary. So, like I said, investigation, a lot is still lacking. The sorts of crimes that we have, this is not just anymore about, sympathy or promptness. The nature of the crime is becoming so technical that often the kind of force we have and their abilities to investigate these crimes, there's a huge mismatch, especially when it comes to cyber crimes. For instance, if there is a case of an accused person disseminating a non-consensual imagery of a victim online on social media platforms, it's one of the gravest offenses we have under the IT Act with a significant punishment. And imagine it's endorsed to an inspector who doesn't even have a social media account, who doesn't even know how social media works. So you can well imagine his capability of investigating this case. It's not possible to do justice to such an investigation. And these are the things, that we often think about, that policymakers are thinking about, that experts are recommending in their reports, that these things now need a major overhaul. We need to change our recruitment and training policies to have a workforce that's equipped to deal with the crimes of the future, and that future has arrived. The sophistication of crimes has grown to such an extent that the majority of our force is now unequipped to be able to investigate them effectively. Then similarly, when it comes to prosecution, most typically what happens is the police files a charge sheet and thinks that their job is done. We are simply not bothered about the prosecution process. Again, this is something that a number of police forces are starting to investigate in. In recent years, we have now created posts of an ADG prosecution who looks after the prosecution of the entire state. But we need to have police officers designated for the work of prosecution. According to me, there should be a DCP prosecution in every commissionerate who should look after what happens to the case after it is charge sheeted. Because the actual hope of dispensing justice begins only after that. But if you're going to just throw the charge sheet and forget all about it, and the case is going to come to trial 4 or 5 years later, by when all the people who were there at the time, have disappeared to God knows where, there's almost zero accountability. There is nobody to say, hey, you know what, your investigation was really poor. And imagine, instead, if we had a system where if a charge sheet was filed today, 15 days later, the trial was to begin. Then if I'm the investigator, sword would constantly hang on my head that the trial begins in 15 days. And if there's anything found wanting with my investigation, I will be taken to task. That is the cycle that we ought to have of investigation and prosecution. But it's because of the huge overburdening of the system and so much shortage in the judiciary that, it's almost unimaginable, this sort of scenario that I'm talking about. So investigation, prosecution, again, two twin pillars that need major investment of energy, time, commitment, effort from the police and from the other stakeholders of the criminal justice machinery in order for justice truly to prevail. So I'm going to stop here now and we can open up for discussion.
Wonderful discourse. We regularly have, lordships, Supreme Court judges, High Court judges, District Court judges. They tell judicial part, but very less we get, view of the police in the justice system. So your was a very frank discussion. You called a spade, though in limited words. We understand, but you are the hope of the police force. Because I have I have had the opportunity of meeting many police people. That policing with human approach somehow as a nation we lack. So you and some more young officers I see they are bringing this policing with human approach. So I see future bright. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Right.
And you are a natural professor of law. You can take up teaching profession.
I didn't to get a degree in law. I will
Yeah,
at some stage. I
because
really want.
because my personal experience is everybody is very shy of interacting with faculty and students, but some are very interested and they have a lot of content. So you are one of them. You can be in future you can join law schools as law professor post
So
retirement.
I'm hoping for a job offer from you, Dr. Kushresh.
Yeah, it's open offer. We shall be privileged to have you among us because it's not easy to deal with a subject in a holistic manner. Some people have that knack, so you are a natural teacher, and we are fortunate to have you among us. So now I think floor is open for Q&A. Dr. Ritu,
Yeah.
please moderate the
So,
questions. Uh, uh,
Mr. Avinash is there.
yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Avinash is
good
there.
afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah, Avinash, you can ask question, and if somebody want to ask question personally, they can raise hand,
Yeah.
Okay.
so we can unmute themselves. Okay.
Ma'am, one of the question asked by a student is that what are the critical issues being faced by the females most frequently in Gautam Buddha Nagar, and what advice you would like to give to the females for better secure environment in this area?
Okay. Um, I think the most common problems that are being faced are eve teasing or petty harassment in the form of, let's say, stalking somebody while they're waiting at a bus stop, or getting their number and forcibly messaging them, or repeatedly sending them requests online on a social media platform. So I think those are the most common instances of harassment that girls face and which often go ignored. And because they go ignored, bigger things have a probability of occurring, because every time we overlook some kind of nuisance perpetrated by an accused, and that can be a boy or a girl, we are emboldening them to commit a bigger crime. So my advice is, please do not take any nonsense from anybody. I always say that God has given girls a sixth sense. Whenever anybody is harboring wrong intentions towards you, it's as if a radar lights up. We always know it. So there is no reason why you should be taking incorrect behavior or improper behavior from everybody. It's good to be on your guard. It's good to be alert. Don't put yourself in a situation where you may be insecure, where your safety can be jeopardized. But if somebody is, just blatantly being a nuisance, report it at the right place. And just really quickly, the two things that I will share. One is a helpline number called 1090, which is actually an excellent resource. And this is for, this kind of general harassment, slightly prolonged, where you don't need instant help, but you do need some help. It's a completely anonymous platform. Your call will connect directly to a call center in Lucknow. They don't even ask you your name or any other personal identifying features, but they will make sure that they put in place, put in his or her place the alleged aggressor or the person who is harassing you. So 1090 is a great resource to call whenever you are having this kind of issue. And if ever you are in an emergency situation where you need instant help, oftentimes, let's say you are returning from somewhere after dark and it's deserted, and you don't apparently see anything, but there's a general sense of insecurity. Please always call 112. We also offer a night escort service with 112. If you call 112 and simply say that I'm scared, please just go with me till I reach my destination. If you have your own vehicle, they will trail you in your vehicle until you reach home or wherever it is that you want to reach. And if you don't have a vehicle, they'll put you in their vehicle and drop you home. So just be aware of that. Be an aware citizen of this country. Know your rights. Know what processes are in place for your convenience, and use them to your convenience.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. The next question is that what difficulties and challenges does police personnel face while dealing with critical issues? For example, recent farmer protest.
I think the most critical issue is that the police is the default punching bag for everybody. So the job of the police is extremely difficult. We'll get express instructions from the top, for example, saying that no farmers from any village in Gautam Buddha Nagar should be able to reach Delhi. But at the same time, if there is any use of force or there is any apparent use of force also, we face fire. And again, I'm going to very blatantly give a personal example. Recently, after the Hathras issue, we had Ms. Priyanka Gandhi and Mr. Rahul Gandhi trying to go to Hathras. And that time I was there, and we had such little force that at some point I was literally just holding on to Mr. Rahul Gandhi by his kurta. It was just me. And I was there the entire time until it ended. And nothing happened. I made sure that I was personally there because they had a lot of women. And later on, somebody tore a piece of their kurta, and they started putting this picture everywhere saying that Gautam Budh Nagar police tore our kurta. Now that's absolute bunkum. It did not happen. But you see, like how difficult it is, and when people in so many numbers, they descend upon you, and you cannot let them have what they want. Whether that's right or not is a decision which is taken far beyond our level. But we simply have to enforce it, but without any use of force or without any apparent use of force also. Appearances are as important as the actual action. So I think that is what makes the job really tough.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, another question is asked one of my student is that, ma'am, we heard that you studied in England. So what motivated you to join the civil services?
I have some people in my family who are in the services. A lot of women in my family are in the civil services. And I grew up watching them be extremely committed to their jobs and believe in the potential of their jobs till the day of retirement. That it's a platform that really helps you make a difference to the everyday lives of India's citizens from the very first day. And I think that that's something very peculiar. And a lot of people ask me this very often, that you could have stayed on in the US or you could have stayed on in England. But I firmly believe, yes, you may make more money in those countries, but the canvas of impact that you have at such a young age and with such little qualification, I only have a bachelor's degree, is not possible in any other corporate job. It's simply not possible, because if you think about the population numbers in India and how steep the learning curve here is, because things are changing so fast. It's such a big market. It's such a huge population that anything you're doing is impacting so many people at once. I just don't think it's possible to have such a large canvas in many other jobs, unless you're just like truly brilliant and an innovator or something, coming up with some new technology, which I'm not. So that's why I came back.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, we have also heard that you know 7 different languages. So is that true?
Yes, I do know 7 languages. Do you want me to count them?
No.
So I speak English, Hindi, Punjabi, French very fluently. I have native fluency on 4 of these. Also Nagamese and Assamese. Nagamese is the language they speak in Nagaland. Assamese is the language they speak in Assam. I have almost near native fluency in those 2. So 6 would be those. And then I can also handle a bit of Spanish. So that's 7, I think.
Thank you, ma'am. The floor is open. Sir, you can, Pragati sir, you can unmute one of them. They can ask the question. If the time is, we have the time. We have the time.
I think Avinash, you moderate the questions because somebody may ask something which may not go down well.
Yeah, right.
We have law students and I am proud of them, especially ma'am, girls, those who are taking up law, it empowers them a lot. I really see they are feature of this, nation, very proud, very empowering, and not taking any nuisance, very
Yes.
clear in their head what they want to make.
Yes.
This legal profession is giving them a lot of empowerment. And I see when they join after +2 and when they pass out, see change in their personality. And you being there, they will see a lot of role models.
No. So too generous of you to say that. Anyway, yes, questions.
Ma'am, one of the student has asked that why doesn't police organizes a self-defense program, or is there any program which is being organized for girls who feel that they are a little, weak in these areas? for self-defense purposes?
Okay. So we do keep arranging them from time to time. Like recently, we had a week, the inauguration week of Mission Shakti, we did. It's just that, now because of the lockdown, it's not possible to do things on a big scale. So we were only able to arrange it for 50 girls with social distancing, things like that. And also, I think simply the police is so hard pressed for resources because most of the trainers that we use are our own havaldars and ustads, who also have other duty to do. So it's not possible for us to commit so many resources all throughout the year. But we always keep encouraging organizations and resident welfare associations and societies to organize things like these at their own level. Because I think this is, there are a number of excellent trainers out there, especially retired army personnel, often start their own service of this sort, giving self-defense training, things like that. They're excellent resource persons. So we do encourage that you can always explore other avenues for picking up such skills. But that said, I'm just going to add in a line that I have a bit of an ideological objection to girls being expected to learn self-defense. I think it's a great failure of us as a society and as a policing system that only our girls feel the need to learn self-defense. So I'm not a great enthusiast about self-defense classes. I can just tell you that. Yeah.
Hello, sir. Can I ask a question from ma'am?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Mohit. I'm pursuing LLM from here. And thank you for inspiring us through your journey from a civil servant to be a very confident police officer of Gautam Budh Nagar. So my question is, ma'am, sometimes, by media, by news media, it looks like the system is not sensitive towards a rape victim. Whatever happened with media and the police in Hathras, that create a lot of hue and cry in the society. So what is your view? Like you have said, police is, I feel that police is surrounded by all of them, like politicians, judiciary, media, society. So everybody start questioning police. So what you feel ki whatever happened that was good, or some sort of other mode of, can be adopted by the police to tackle that situation, whatever happened. And it is a huge law and order situation that can, turn into the rights by the one section of a community.
It's an excellent question. And I suppose a challenging one. See, there are two answers to this. One is that things are so politicized, particularly in a state like UP. The factors of caste and creed and sex are so deeply entrenched. How they say that India lives in several centuries at once. I think UP is a classic example of that, especially a place like Gautam Budh Nagar. It's going forward economically and commercially, but it's stuck in another century as far as considerations of caste and creed and sex are concerned. So there are a number of political factors which lead to things being misrepresented in the media and which lead to things spiraling out of control. That I will tell you. But also there is no denying that in a number of cases, the police also botches up things. And there is, a blatant messing up of the situation. And sometimes that can happen because of, one or two wrong decisions taken. You have to understand our job is such that you have to constantly think on your feet. And sometimes, you just end up making the wrong decision and you pay for its consequences. So I would say that. And then I would close off by saying that, yes, we do require a lot of infusion of sensitivity in the system. I always tell my force that when we are in the police, rape becomes such a common term for us. And we start counting numbers as if we are counting balls or something. But we are not realizing that this is one life which has been badly brutalized. And I just want to share an example of something new that we are doing, which I think, many of you will appreciate. We have recently in the month of September started counseling for victims of child rape. because I started thinking that, these are 13-year-old girls, 11-year-old girls, in some cases 7-year-old girls who have been raped, and how hard it must be to move on from a situation like this. And so we started professional counseling for these victims and their families. And you'd be surprised at the kinds of things that we got exposed to in the process. In one case, for instance, it was a large family. The parents are barely educated. They live in a one-room tenement in a slum colony. And the older sister and the older brother, who are also just, in their teens, they constantly pick on the victim saying, "Arey, tu to gandi hai. Tere saath to gandi cheez ho gayi, tu to gandi hai." Imagine if your own siblings are saying this to you from morning till night. How can we possibly expect the victim to heal? And things like these, concerns like these are just falling through. Nobody is paying any attention to them because we just simply don't have the time and the resources. And our counselors went in there and we actually did counseling for the siblings to ensure that they don't speak like this. And we explained to the parents what the kids were doing and what a detrimental effect it must be having on the victim. In another case, the victim's family, again very poor, is living exactly opposite to the accused's family. The victim is just 8 years old. And all through the day, she keeps sitting at a window and she keeps looking into the accused's house, saying, "Wo meri taraf dekhte rehte hain." And that child is obsessed. That's all she kept telling the counselor, कि देखो वो मुझे अभी भी देख रहे हैं, देखो वो भैया की मम्मी मुझे अभी भी देख रही है, भैया being the accused, he's in jail. Just imagine, it's impossible for the victim to heal. But our system is so apathetic, we have no systems for healing, emotionally and mentally healing the victims of such heinous crimes. And so we are trying to do something. In some cases where our counselors are not good enough, I've made tie-ups with Fortis and of course with Nithari Hospital. They both have psychiatrists and psychotherapists. We take these children there. Post-stress traumatic disorder develops in a number of rape victims. They are not able to sleep properly. They don't speak anymore. They don't talk properly. They don't go out to play. But nobody is bothered, because there are so many problems in a country like India. The parents are illiterate, they can barely earn 2 square meals. They have several children. They don't have the time to bother about things like these. But if we are able to infuse even a small amount of sensitivity, so this family which was staying across from the accused, we actually helped them get another house on rent in another colony so that the victim would be away from that scenario and away from that neighborhood where that had occurred. So that's all I have to say. There are a number of problems and a number of failures on multiple levels.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. Can I ask the next question? It's not a question, basically, it's just you can say an observation, ma'am. First of all, it was a huge treat to watch you and listen to you, ma'am. It was just amazing. And indeed, you are a role model for not only females, but even for the young generation, ma'am. So I'm really, truly, it's a privilege to watch you here, ma'am. Truly. Ma'am, there's one thing which really, hits me again and again. I mean, what can be done so that maybe, why there is a fear in general layman, more and particularly in females, to walk inside a police station fearlessly, to lodge a complaint, to lodge an FIR. And why is it so difficult for the police to actually register an FIR? And if registering an FIR and complaint in UP, why only in Hindi? At times, people cannot be that fluent with Hindi. Why not in English? Because I remember once upon a time when I entered a police station in Vaishali to lodge my complaint, and my complaint was written in English, and I was told कि पहले मैडम जाइए इसको हिंदी में लिख के आइए फिर हम आपकी बात सुनेंगे. And of course, they never registered my FIR. Finally, I had to file a complaint before the magistrate. That is how I had to proceed. So that is the thing. मतलब एक डर होता है that, oh my God, police station, how do I walk? No. It's a scary place. Yeah. What can be done so that, people get out of it?
Right. See, I think I'm not going to claim that everything is well and rosy with the police. I'm really not going to claim that. But I also think that the police, unfortunately, is suffering from a great deal of historical baggage. The police has been misused politically so much, and it has had a history of being so apathetic that that baggage is refusing to leave it, despite a great reformation in our processes and in the way the police now conducts itself. So in a number of cases, people often ask me this question that you've asked, and I will often tell them that how many of you have actually gone ahead and interacted with them, had a bad experience? And I find that the majority of them have never even tried. So my first appeal would be to give the police a chance, to give them the benefit of the doubt that they will do what is right. And my personal experience is that in 95% cases, the police actually helps with instant redressal at the level of the police station itself. It's simply that we have such a long history of bad baggage associated with the image of the police that we think that nothing has changed. But things today are very different, especially in the NCR region. They are very different. There is such a great degree of media scrutiny, and people here are so aware and educated and wealthy that the police is constantly wary of doing something wrong and it instantly flashing on social media or on media. So down to the last, I'll give you a very simple example. Like my drivers, they live in sector 27, and so one day they said कि madam they got late coming, and I said कि आप late क्यों हो गए? They said कि वो किसी कोई मैडम चला रही थी गाड़ी, उनके कुछ ऐसे हो गया कि आगे पीछे स्वर्व हो गई या कुछ ऐसे हो गया. तो मैंने कहा कि कहते कि वही गलत थी मैडम. तो मैंने कहा कि तो कोई आप उन्हें बताते या थाने लेके जाते? कहते नहीं, हम यहाँ की लेडीज से बिल्कुल उलझते नहीं है. कहते हम नोएडा की लेडीज से बिल्कुल उलझते नहीं है. सीधा उन्होंने ये बोला. जैसे मैडम इंग्लिश में वो इतनी तेज तेज बोलती हैं, हमें बिल्कुल खा जाएंगी, हम उनसे उलझते नहीं है. So that's actually the mindset of the last constable on the ground, but we sitting in our ivory towers are perceiving something completely different.
Right.
Then second, as far as and then I think the reason why this is the basic logic for converting the system in Gautam Budh Nagar from an SSP to a commissionerate, that now there are so many more officers and it becomes so easy to see a fairly senior officer very easily and very close to you. So now there are 3 zonal DCPs. One district has been divided into 3 zones, and an SP rank officer is sitting in every zone available to meet the people there. So that fear also seeps down at the level of the police station, that if we don't do it, in a jiffy, the person can go to the DCP and complain. I think that also has changed a lot, and people are just not realizing it, because on a daily basis, the layperson doesn't have as much interface with the police. And third, as far as the language issue is concerned, I completely agree with you. It's just that, we are at present in a political dispensation which is actually really encouraging the revival of Hindi and the mainstreaming of Hindi for administrative purposes. And it's the language of the state. And also there are fundamental flaws in our recruitment and training process. Most of the force is not able to manage English at all. And I think that that's hugely problematic. I think English should be a mandatory component of their training, because it's the global language, it's the lingua franca of the world, and it's important for everybody to understand it to a basic degree. So that I think is a huge problem. But that said, at the level of the police stations, if you say that you need help writing your application in Hindi, I think they will make somebody available who will be able to help you with it. So,
okay, ma'am, I was not aware of this, because I was asked to just go back and just bring it in writing in Hindi.
आप किसी को कह दीजिए. So one constable would have sat with you and would have helped you write it. That's what we do here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we should end the questions. We cannot take more questions because we are flooding with number of questions. We can't take all of them due to paucity of time. Now I would request Dr. Ritu Gautam ma'am to please proceed with the session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mom, for such a enlightening session. I would like to propose this vote of thanks on my behalf and on the behalf of School of Law, Sharda University. It was such a wonderful session, ma'am. We all were really enlightened, and you have given such a wonderful insight on the entire police administration system, and you have very well, correlated everything with the theories of punishment and the practical aspect, and you have also, enlightened us on with the issues and challenges police is facing. And I'm definitely, I can say, our student got benefited by that. And thank you so much, ma'am. And it's always a pleasure to hear you. Thanks a lot for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Now, 1 second, ma'am. So I would like to call Dean sir to facilitate you virtually.
All right.
But you have not given me gift of ma'am. Dr. Ritu,
Okay. Yes, sir.
we can do it in, I think,
Okay.
one
I'll
second.
go
One
personally
second.
then.
Just wait. Or we can go to FDRC, and when ma'am is there, we can
Yes.
we can give that memento to ma'am personally. So ma'am, whenever you are here, we will
Sure, that's fine.
as a token of our regards.
Thank you so much. That's
Because
no
I
problem.
still remember when this pandemic occurred, so we were very reluctant to visit with faculty, and I told ma'am, now with Corona, how will we come to police station? You said no, it has to go on. I'll speak to chancellor if required, and you made us. So I really, ma'am, this is a beautiful Taj Mahal for you from all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
We
you, ma'am.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
This is from Agra. We have got it for you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll get it delivered to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish you all a very good day. I'll log off. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am.